All right, good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Blues Deluxe. Today it's my honor and pleasure to have Al Basile with me, formerly with the band Roomful of Blues long time ago. And Al's doing lots of stuff now by himself with his own solo career, which he's been doing for quite a lot of records. I can't believe how many records you have. Your solo records, incredible. Um, so let's talk about you. Where'd you grow up in Rhode Island?
No, I grew up in Haverhill.
Haverhill, Mass.
Yes, next door. You're in Lowell, right?
I'm in Haverhill. I live in Haverhill. How do you like that?
Well, I grew up in Haverhill. I lived in Haverhill until I was 14. Then I went away to boarding school, and I never really lived in Haverhill after that. But my folks lived in Haverhill their whole lives until they passed in the 90s. So I used to go back and see them a lot.
I'm here now. That's where I live.
Great.
I got a story for you about Haverhill that you probably don't know about.
Fire away. I probably don't.
I did an interview with a guy named Joe Ualey. He was the drummer in John Mayall's band.
Okay.
He grew up here in Haverhill. He and I were talking about that. And he left
Really?
He left at the age of 16. He thumbed to Salisbury Beach and then got a ride out to California, and he was working ever since from that point on. But he grew up here in Haverhill too. It was crazy when I talked to him.
How old is he? Still alive?
Yeah, he's still around. He's still alive.
How old is he?
I'm guessing in his early 80s.
So he's not much older than me. I'm 77.
Yeah,
I don't know the name. Did he record with Mayall?
Yeah, 20, 25, 30 years. He was the drummer in Mayall's band.
Wow, that's great.
How's that? And he was from Haverhill. He was blown away when I told him where I was. He goes, "Oh yeah, I grew up in Haverhill." Yeah, how's that for a story?
Something must be in the water, I guess.
Yeah, he said to me, he said he thumbed and he hitchhiked all the way to California at 16. He went to Salisbury Beach, and then from there he got a ride out to California, and I guess he stayed in somebody's house for a while, and then he ended up. If you get a chance, go to my YouTube page. His interview is fabulous that I did with him.
Thank you. I'm going to write that down. How do you spell his name? Is it
Yuele? Ualey. Joe.
Ualey. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, he's in his 80s, I'm guessing. But he was fascinating when he came up and said, "Oh, I grew up in Haverhill, Mass." I go, "You're kidding me." And then when he told me his story, it was like, "Oh, this is going to be great." And then he just kept going. All the Mayall stories he told, you're gonna love that.
Absolutely.
So you grew up in Haverhill, and then how did you end up a musician? I know you started out. You went to school and you were writing and doing all kinds of things like that. How'd you end up a musician?
Well, that story starts in Haverhill because when I was 8, my parents said, we'd like you to learn an instrument, but we want you to pick the instrument because we want it to be something that you actually want to stick with. And so I chose the trumpet, and I had a private teacher named Ed Lupi, who was a famous guy in Haverhill forever. And I ended up actually doing a public access television show with him in the aughts when he was in his late 90s. And we did a half hour. He had a sextet, and I played cornet, and he of course had taught me how to play the trumpet, but he wasn't playing trumpet in his mid 90s, but he was still playing the violin. So we were the two soloists in front of the rhythm section, was Ed Lowe and me on violin and cornet. So I learned from him how to read music, how to physically play the instrument. I didn't know anything about jazz. I didn't know that he played jazz. I never heard him play jazz until I heard a tape. It was made in 1950, and I didn't hear that until the 90s. And it turned out by that point, his style and my style were completely compatible, even though we'd never talked about it. I never heard him. But of course, we had the same models because he came up in the swing era, and I came up later, but listened to the swing era. And so I knew how to play the instrument. I went to Andover, and then I went to Brown, which is how I ended up in Rhode Island. And those through Andover, I could read. So, I played in the orchestra, I played in the marching band, the pep band, the brass. I did everything that you could do. But again, it was strictly as a reader.
Yep.
And I went to college at Brown, and the conductor of the orchestra at Brown interviewed me, and he said, "Oh, I see you play the trumpet. We already have enough trumpet players. You want to switch to French horn?" And I said, "No." I want to play French horn. I would have started putting the mouthpiece on my lower lip 10 years ago. So he said, "Well, I can't use you, but if you ever want to switch to French horn, come back and see me." So I put the horn down and I didn't touch it. I didn't touch it for 5 years. So when I was in college, I was involved, oddly enough, because I was a writer. I wrote musical plays, but I had a partner who wrote the music. Yep. I couldn't write music in those days. I wrote the book and the lyrics. So they were Broadway type shows. So I was writing songs, but with a partner back, in those days. Wasn't musical myself, didn't sing, didn't play. Got out of Brown, went in the Army because I was going to be drafted. So I enlisted in the Massachusetts National Guard, got trained, came back after 6 months. And so by the time I was back in town, all my college friends, of course, had graduated. But I had made new friends, and they were musicians. So by that point, I had already met Duke, and I was friends with this guy who was 6 years younger than I am. He was going to high school when I was going to college, and that's Scott Hamilton, who's, one of the greatest tenor players alive. But at the time, he was a 15-year-old harp player in a blues band. Wow. He played harmonica. And so I used to go see them play. And the year after that, he switched to tenor sax, and he had a band. And they were just playing locally, and he used to have jam sessions at his house. And I was friends with everybody, so I would go listen. And one day he said to me, "Didn't you used to play something?" I said, "Yeah, I used to play the trumpet, but I haven't touched it in 5 years." He said, "Well, look, if you ever want to learn to do what we do, you can sit in and play at our jam sessions here in the house, and it's not in public, and we all know you, and you can struggle, because you're going to sound terrible when you start, but that's okay." And so I took him up on it, and I started playing in sessions at his house.
Again,
and then
you started back again at it.
Yeah, except this time, it was improvising. And I didn't know anything about improvising. And that interested me. I wanted to learn how to do that. Because I was never a great legit trumpet player. I could read and play, but it didn't excite me. Improvising excited me. And that's what these guys were doing. Yep. The blues guys. And then Scott eventually evolved into a jazz guy. But that was like, it just opened my eyes, and it was invaluable because I had a place to play and nobody had to hear me suck, because it sound, Yeah. Not only did I not know how to improvise, I was only just starting to get my chops back to even play.
Yep.
So they were very patient with me. But, within about a year, the first time I ever played in public was with Scott. And that was in 1972. And then Duke heard about me. And the next year, at that point, Roomful had the three saxes. And they had a gig they were going to play at the Knickerbocker, which is the big club in Rhode Island you probably heard about.
Yep.
Half the band lived in Westerly, and the Knickerbockers in Westerly. Anyway, they had a gig with Red Prysock. Now we were hanging out with Scott. He was listening to all the great rhythm and blues tenor players. So we were listening to Sandeman Taylor and Florshow Cully and Joe Houston and Red Prysock and Syl Austin and all of these guys that were not famous in the 70s,
right?
But they were to us. So Red was going to come to the Nick and play a night with the band. And Duke said to me, listen, in order to make the songs we're going to play behind Red sound right, we really need a trumpet as a lead voice in the section. So would you be willing to just for one gig come and learn, rehearse and learn the songs and play the gig? And I said, sure. So I did that. We learned 6 songs. And they were all Red's big hits, hand clapping. And so we came and he came and we did the gig. And he was funny because we only learned the 6 songs. So he played every song like 3 or 4 times during the course of the night. But the way he made it work was we did all the songs and then he would get on the mic and he'd go, well, we have a request for a tune we did earlier in the evening. So we just did them over and over
again. Yep.
So at the end of the night, we're all sitting around and we had given Red, his favorite drink was Dewar's. And we given him a half gallon of Dewar's. He had arrived on a motorcycle. Okay. He rode up from New York on a hog. And that's parked outside. We give him this half gallon of Dewar's. And he's sitting there and he says, you guys have a great band. And Duke said, well, actually, we're the band. We just hired this guy, me, just to play behind you. And Red said, oh, you got to hire this man. He says, because the trumpet, it puts fire in the arrangement. And so they hired me.
There you go.
So I don't think I've ever told that story with other interviews that I've done. So that was just for you. But that's how I got hired. And then Roomful at the time, we were playing 5-6 days a week. I mean, it was a crash course in learning the music, playing in front of audiences. And they broke me in. At first, I was just playing parts, and then they would give me a solo because I was just learning really how to solo at that point. Yep. And then gradually I did more and more and more until they fired me.
Wow.
So I was with them for 73, 74, 75, right before they made the first album. And we, right around the time that we started backing up older, well-known musicians. So Prysock was one example, but then we played with Cleanhead Vincent. Then we played behind Helen Humes. So we were starting to do that kind of thing. And then, of course, later on, after I left, they made records with Cleanhead. They made records with Big Joe Turner, Earl King. That became a staple with the band, was that they would play with and record with people. But it started in my era. And so, I was in the band when we played behind Cleanhead for the first time. And I actually even have live recordings of us with Cleanhead where I'm in the band, but I'm not on the commercial record that they made a number of years later.
Yeah. Wow. That must be special to have. in your
Yeah.
archive?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
It's
so
yeah.
what was it like to play with Roomful those 3 years or 2.5 years for yourself?
Oh, it was well, okay. I had just been in grad school at Brown, but it was like going to grad school, except musical grad school, and it wasn't like a music school. Because most of the guys in the band could not read. So we weren't like given, well, here's your part, play this. We learned all the songs by ear. And Duke would make cassette tapes off his 78s of like a Louis Jordan tune or, a T-Bone Walker tune or,
Yep.
whatever. We were doing all of this, everything from swing era stuff, by Count Basie, going back to B.B. King stuff, going, rhythm and blues, classic stuff, New Orleans stuff. And so he would make these tapes and we would learn songs in the bus on the way to the jobs. We would memorize our parts. And so it was kind of the old fashioned way of doing things. We learned by ear. And when we were on the stand, if you're playing behind a vocalist and you're setting riffs, we wouldn't necessarily know what the riff was going to be. One of us, usually Piccolo or Rich Latai, would get an idea for a riff, and we'd all put our heads together, and they'd play it quietly, and we would listen. This is in the middle of the song.
Wow.
And then the next time the vocalist came in, we would play that riff behind a vocalist. So we were really doing things the way that a lot of people had done things back in the 30s and 40s. So it was an amazing education that way.
So you were experimenting a little bit.
Well, but within a tradition.
Right.
It's like everything that we were doing had to be authentic because we loved that music so much. We didn't want to sound kind of like it. We wanted to own it. We wanted to really nail it. And the other thing, so I learned a lot about music. I learned a tremendous amount about professionalism and and the sacrifices you had to make. It changed our lifestyles. I would get in on a normal night between 3 and 6 in the morning, get home. I would leave for the next day around 4 o'clock because we had to drive around and pick people up. It took a ton of time. And in those days, clubs, every club, in the 40s, 50s had a piano and they kept them in good condition. Well, by the 70s, that was no longer the case because rock had come in and they were guitar oriented. So we had to bring a piano with us. We traveled in a school bus and we had a 600-pound concert upright piano because in those days, there were no electronic pianos. There were electric pianos, but they didn't sound like pianos.
So you had the upright in the bus.
Yes, which is so it's bouncing up and down for 2 hours while we get to the gig. Of course, it's out of tune. So we had to get to every gig an hour early so that Al Copley, who was a piano player, could tune the piano.
Wow.
Also, we didn't have roadies. So we were the piano movers.
Yeah.
So we had these two 2x8 boards that we put in the back of the bus and, the emergency door.
Yep.
And we would roll, we had the piano on dollies with wheels. And we would roll the piano down these boards.
Yep.
And then we'd have to get it into the club, move it ourselves. Al would have to tune it. We would do the gig and then it started all over again.
And then get it back up into the bus again, right?
Yes. And one of the things that was going on was I found that as a trumpet player, I couldn't drink and play. So the thing that is second nature to most musicians, I couldn't do. Well, what that meant was that I was sober at the end of the night. Well, without getting into individuals, I might have been the only one sober by the end of the night. So pushing a piano, there was many a time when you think it's going off the rails.
Yep.
So it was an education that way. And, you know, then getting to meet the older musicians was fabulous. We did a lot of festivals, and we backed up a lot of people. We did a festival on Long Island where we backed up Johnny Shines. I mean, wow. Johnny Shines had traveled and played with Robert Johnson. You can't get any closer to the source than that. And Johnny was great. So that was the thing, getting to meet those older people, and they were happy to meet us, because by the mid-70s, nobody was interested in what they had done in the 40s and 50s. Their own kids didn't listen to their music. Their kids were, into funk.
Yeah.
So to find these guys, we were white guys, but they didn't care.
Right. You were playing music that from their era.
We loved the same stuff. We learned the same stuff, and we even learned in the same way. So they were always very, very encouraging, and it was great to play with them because they saw that what they did hadn't completely died out.
Right. And they didn't have a big band sound either back then. It was only them.
That's also true. And we were kind of, we were betwixt and between, because we had the four horns, and it allowed us to stretch between the small group things and the more big band things. And you probably know, for instance, after the Second World War, most of the big bands disbanded. And even the ones that were able to keep going went through some big changes. So Basile, by 1948, had cut his band down to an octet. He had four horns and four rhythm. Well, so that was us. So and nobody was doing what we were doing exactly. But as we traveled around the country, at the time we went as far west as Chicago, Ann Arbor, and we didn't get too far south, but we did the whole Northeast corridor. And everywhere we go, we would meet people. And like you say, most of the musicians we met were in small bands that didn't have horns.
But you guys could split it up. You could either do it large scale or you could do it small scale.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. That's interesting that you were able to do that.
Well, that's really why Duke hired me, really, was to be able to be flexible, I'm guessing. But because we loved a range of stuff, we wanted to do bassy tunes that he did with the big band and not make them sound scrawny. But we also wanted to do, like the things that Muddy was doing, or Wolf. I mean, Wolf, and we did a festival with Wolf in 1975 that was very memorable. And, Wolf had Eddie Shaw in his band. So he had a horn, but he didn't have so we could do that stuff too. So, yeah.
So it's flexible. That was the whole idea, I'm guessing. That's why Duke did it that way.
Yeah, because we love too much different stuff, and we wanted to do it all.
There you go.
Right. So that's coming from Duke, because Duke, we all learned so much from him. He was the guy that had the encyclopedic knowledge of the music. and he had the 78 collection because in those days
He still
there were
does.
those.
He still does. Last time I
He,
talked to him, he's asking me if I had any to give him.
yeah, he's continually looking for stuff. He's got a he may I don't know if he still has it, but half his garage is stacked with 78s.
Yep.
So yeah.
So let's talk about post Roomful, 75, 76 onward.
Yeah,
What
wow.
what did you decide to do once you were leaving Roomful? What was the next phase of your career?
Well, it was very deliberate because in Roomful I had been a sideman, and that was a great way to get into it. But I thought, well, all right, the next logical step is for me to have my own group, and for me to be, the front guy. And in order to do that, well, there were three things that I wanted to learn when I left Roomful. I want to learn to sing because that was like tripled your chances of getting a job if you had a singer. The managers would always say, "You get a singer, right?" And he would go, "Oh yeah." So, and I'll get there's a story behind that I'll get to in a minute if while we're still young. But so I want to learn to sing. I want to learn to improvise on standards like the regular jazz guys did, not just on blues. By the time I left Roomful, I could play on blues. That's what we did. But I want to learn standards because really that's the jazz thing. And then I wanted to study music theory and learn how to write music because I remembered that I wrote lyrics and I'd lost my partner to write music. And I thought, well, if I can learn to write music, I can write songs by myself. So those are three things I wanted to learn. And what I did was I'd saved some money from what I'd made in the band. And I said, I'm not going to look for a job, a day job. I'll try to play gigs locally. I'm not going to have a full-time job. I'm going to learn these things. And I'm going to make the money last as long as I can and try to learn. And so for the next 3 years, that's what I did. I learned how to sing. I learned how to play on standards, and I learned how to write. And it's like everything that I do now is based on those 3 years. Because by the time I was done with the 3 years, I took a job teaching in a private school in Rhode Island, teaching music and teaching English, those were my things. And I taught at that school for 25 years. So I had local bands and I played jazz gigs for all that time, 20, 25 years. But then I had the day job. And then and I started, and I was working with Duke. I was on a lot of his records. We wrote songs together.
Yeah.
And in the late 90s, so I was teaching until 2005. But in the late 90s, I was at a point where I thought, all right, I want to make my own solo records. And I asked Duke if he would produce me and if I could use the people in his bands. And he said, yeah. And so we started. And I made my first few records while I was still teaching. And then when I left teaching, I started making them every year. So I've got 21 solo albums now.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah, and with the exception of one of them, which is a kind of a swing album where I'm doing standards. That's kind of like my jazz sideline.
Yeah.
All the rest of them are blues roots, blues based. And I've written all the songs myself. So I really got very heavily into writing, and Duke always produced me until the last few years. And now I've cycled into producing my own records as well. So I use Kid Anderson as a guitarist. And for the last 2 records, two new records. There's one record that's a best of, that's remasterings of old stuff. But the two most recent ones over the last 3 years, I produced myself. And I got involved several years ago with a guy who owns a studio in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we're production partners. So we produce other people in that studio. And so then I work with him as producer. And so it's pretty good. I record everything up here in Rhode Island, but then we mix and we master everything down there.
Look at how far you've come. Think about all of you've done all these years. Look at how far you've come.
It took a long time, but you're right. I wouldn't have predicted that, but there was some design involved. Like I said, I wanted to learn to do these things. And so then once I learned how to do them, then I've been doing them.
But you've been doing that your whole life. You've been reteaching yourself new things your whole life.
Yes, and other things too, because I wrote plays in college, and then I started writing them again like 10 years ago. So, and different kinds of stuff. But just a quick story that I want to tell about the first band that I had after I left Roomful was an instrumental band. And so I had guitar, bass, and drums, and me. And we were at rehearsal one day, the drummer at the drummer's house, and he was the guy that got us gigs. And he said, listen, I got us a gig at this club in Newport, but there's good news and bad news. And I said, well, what are you talking about?
Give me the good. Give me the good
news. Good news is we got a gig. The bad news is the manager said, you got a singer, right? And I said, oh, yeah, but we didn't have a singer. So we're at rehearsal, and he said, one of us has got to sing. Nobody would do it but me. So that's how I started singing.
Wow.
Yeah. I became a singer by default. Now you can't stop me now, but at the time I wasn't sure I could do it. But if you already know you're gonna, they said, look, you're already in the front with the horn. It makes sense. And of course, I had Pops as a model. So,
well, I'll tell you, one of my favorite records of yours is the Mood Room record, "Grooving in the Mood Room."
Yeah, that's got a little bigger horn section too, because I've got maybe that one does. Soul Blue 7 does too. On some of them, I've kind of evolved into just the two horns. But on some of those earlier records, I had the three horns and had Rich Latai with Doug and with Doc Shannonhouse taking my place and in the section. And Groovin' in the Mood Room was a good one. And that, of course, was recorded in Duke's basement because he's got a recording studio in his.
He calls the Mood Room, right?
He calls it the Mood Room. He hasn't made records there in quite a few years because if you're Duke, no matter how much room you have in your house, it all gets filled in immediately. So all of the rooms in the studio got filled up with stuff, and there's no room in there to record.
So let's talk about this book that you wrote of poetry. You're a songwriter, so I'm guessing that's where some of that came from.
Well, actually, it's 4 books now. I've been had them come out every 4 years for the last 12 years. So my 4th book just came out in April, this past spring. And again, I go back to college. I was writing plays in college, and I was writing fiction in college, and I was writing poetry in college. And I was mostly writing fiction. So I wrote a couple of novels. One I started at Brown and finished the year after I came back from the Army. And then I wrote another one just before I started up with Roomful. And those novels were almost published by Doubleday in the early 70s, but then they weren't. And So then I go on the road and I come back off the road and then I'm doing my other thing. And then I started teaching. And when I started teaching, I thought, well, I'll go back to writing. I'll write another novel now. And I discovered that I couldn't do it. I was teaching high school kids and they just wear you out. I mean, I didn't have enough time in the day. And in those days, if you taught in a private school, they expected you to coach sports.
Yep.
So that meant that I was at school from 8 in the morning until at least 5:30 at night. And if we had away games, it was sometimes 7 to 7:30 before you even get home. So I had all I could do to get my practicing in, on my horn. I couldn't put in hours every day writing a book. So what I did instead was to shift into writing things that were short enough that I could finish them in a night or on a weekend. So I could write a song. Saturday comes, I can write a song and be done with it. Or I could write a poem and be done with it. So that turned out to be much better way for me to manage my life than to start a book that it would take me years to finish and that I felt like I had to spend hours on every day that I didn't have. It's nice to be able to finish something. So that pushed me into short forms. And so, so I was writing songs and then writing poetry, but to me, they're related, but they're not the same. Because when I write a song, the music sets the mood for the words, carries the words along. And when I perform them, I'm projecting those words. I'm telling that story. With poetry, most of the time, people read it off the page. And it has to do all the work just with the words. So the words play a different role. They have to do all the jobs. Whereas in a song, you really don't want the lyrics of a song to be too complex because you only hear a few words at a time. And so you want to kind of make things more linear and easier to understand in phrases. So that works. Musical phrases come one after another.
Yep.
And so for me, because I work with poets and I was at a workshop last week and one of the other poets, I read a new poem and he said, "Oh, you want to make, you could make that into a song." And I said, "I could, but it's not going to happen." And for that reason, I said, "But if you want to put music to it, go ahead." He said, "Oh, okay, maybe I will." So, yeah, they're very different. But at this point, I've got about 450 poems and about 300 songs. So I'm old, but I've been busy.
You've been real busy. I mean, you don't stop. But just listen to all the things you've been doing all these years, and it just keeps going. There's so many different aspects to what you
Yeah.
do.
It's all stuff I love, though. It's all a lot of fun. With my plays, as I told you, I do a play every year, and it's audio. So, and that's because I can afford to record a play, in a day in the studio and work with the engineer. And the actors that I have I have like a little company of actors. They're all people that were in my shows at Brown 55 years ago.
Wow.
So they're in their late 70s and they're still great vocally, but they're old. They look old and they can't get any stage parts because there aren't that many roles for old people.
Yep.
And so for them, it's their chance to still be active, and they don't have to memorize lines because you read it off the page. They don't have to memorize blocking. So it fits them just fine. And so they love it, and they're excellent actors. And so my plays come out great every year. We won national awards and stuff. And so I love doing that. I love doing the poetry, and I'm active doing that. I've got a Zoom show every month with I have two guests who are poets, and we read stuff and talk about our work, and poets enjoy that. We get along great. And so it's interesting. I always say there's three groups of people that know me. There's the musical people that know me as a player and a singer, and then I've got the poetry audience that knows me as a poet, and I love to read. I'm a good performer of my own material. So they know me for that. And then the people that hear my plays, I'm the guy that wrote them. And those three groups don't know each other. They've never met. Each of them thinks I'm a different guy.
Yep. Well, you got a lot going on.
Well, I'm blessed. I'm able to do it. I'm healthy enough to do it. I've got the energy. I've got the time. So ever since I stopped teaching 20 odd years ago, everything ramped up, because it's all I do now. It's just all my creative stuff.
You do whatever you want now, which before I bet you couldn't do.
Well, exactly. Like I say, that's why I don't have a bunch of novels.
Right.
I've got these other things. So it's, yeah.
So the last record was Blues in Hand, is what I see.
Yes.
And that came out last year, right?
Yep. That's it. Came out in October.
And that, I'll tell you, the sound is awesome on that record. I don't know what you did or what.
Well,
go ahead.
Thank you for saying that. My partner will be very happy when I tell him, because I told you I've taken lately to producing my own records. Well, that's one of the things that's different, is that we approached the sound of this new record differently from all the other ones, and we made some changes. And he and I are very happy with what we got for the sound of the record. And anytime anybody like you, and some of the reviewers have said the same thing, but anytime anybody that's a good listener comments on the sound of the record, that makes us feel good, because we're proud of it, and it's nice to know that people actually notice.
Well, sonically, it sounds a lot better than some of the previous records do.
Well, thank you. Most of that is due to my partner in Tennessee, because he's got all of the latest equipment. But we work together. All the decisions on the record were made by me. So it's very satisfying, because I go from, one day I'm walking around and I get an idea and I hear something in my head. And then I go home and I write it and I make a demo. And then months later, we go in the studio and it turns into tracks. And then I make all the decisions on how to put them together. Most artists don't get to make all the choices every stage. Normally somebody else performs what he writes, and then the producer influences the performer, and then, but I'm independent. I've got my own little record company, and so I enjoy that freedom. Well, because now if it's good, I can take a lot of credit, and if it's terrible, it's pretty much my fault.
Yeah, but the previous records, it's not that they were terrible.
Right.
It's a different sound. The new record, you can hear everything.
Well, there's a secret to that I'm not at liberty to reveal, but we did come up with some innovations in mixing and mastering that makes what you hear what you hear. You're exactly right. The idea is you should be able to hear everything, almost.
Nothing gets buried in the mix, and on this
Yes,
record, you can't hear anything get buried in the mix because everything is comes right at you.
exactly. Well, that's by design, and we worked hard to make that happen. So thank you. Like
See
I
that?
said, I'll tell my partner, and he'll go, "Well, that's great. It's great when somebody hears it."
Well, I hear a lot of things. I mean, over all these years, some
Sure.
records sound better than other records. It all depends on who produced the record and what studio it's produced in and the equipment that it's being used
Yep.
and
All of the above.
all of the above. And when you hear one that just blows you away, when you first hear the first two measures of the song, it's like, wow, is the rest of this going to sound like this? And lo and behold, it does. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, what did they figure out? What did they do?
Well, you're going to make a guy in Chattanooga very, very happy tomorrow morning. We talk every Friday morning, and I'll tell him what you said.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear it. I mean, it's
Well, that's what we think, of course,
right.
but people don't always comment on this kind of thing. But
Well, when I play it on the radio, people hear it too because it jumps out at them.
really great.
Yeah, unlike some other mixes where you don't hear the vocals that well, or you don't hear the horns, or you don't hear the guitar, or the bass is buried in the mix. I mean,
Yep.
you
Yep.
hear it's all that.
It's literally hundreds of decisions to make the
Well,
overall
you guys
impact.
made the right decision. That's all I have to tell you.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
Now let's talk about Louis Armstrong. Actually, I want to ask you about your list of horn players, and the two, Louis being number one.
Yep.
And I loved what you said about Miles Davis. I agree with you 100%. On your people don't know this, on your website, you have a list of the horn players that
Yeah, I made it up a long time ago. What did I say about Miles?
you like the early stuff from the 50s versus the other stuff that he did in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah,
And
right.
that was the Prestige era. That was the John Coltrane era, early on.
Yeah, and then going into the early part of the Columbia.
Right.
Walking.
And
then when he
and
started
steaming,
to change.
the records walking and steaming and
Yeah.
all those.
Yep. Well,
I agree with you. That's when Miles was at his peak.
Well, the other thing about that is when I pick a list of trumpet players, I'm not picking a list that I think are like the best trumpet players per se. I'm picking the list of the trumpet players that speak to me, that I learn from, that I can steal from.
Yeah.
And when Miles got into his funk period, I can't steal any of that. Right. You've got to have that kind of rhythm behind you to play that way, because the way that you play has everything to do with what they're playing behind you. It's like they're like building a highway for you, and they're putting the lanes down, and then you can choose your lanes, but some people might only give you 2 lanes. Some people might give you 4 lanes, and you got more room to choose. But it all comes down to the rhythm section of what the drummer and the bass player are doing. And so, yeah, that's the era of Miles that I can relate to the best, because it's closest to what I do and what I try to do, and want to do. But yeah,
that was the Prestige just before the Columbia period. It was all that 50s stuff from 51, 52, all the way through to the early 60s. And then Bitches Brew came out in the 60s.
Yeah, Silent Way and Bitches, and Jack Johnson and Bitches Brew, and everything changed. But and even before that, the Wayne Shorter band doing, like Nefertiti and the latter day Columbia stuff from '64 on, it was beginning to change.
Yep.
So yeah, I agree. I mean, I can appreciate all that stuff. I can love it as music, but I
Well,
can't steal from
there
it.
was some good stuff in there if you listen. Some of it.
I went to Lenny's on the Turnpike in 1970, or either 69 or 70. And I saw Miles with one of the earliest versions of that fusion band. So he had Chick Corea, he had Jack DeJohnette, Gary Bartz, might have been John McLaughlin. And I thought I'd never heard anything like it. Nobody had heard anything like it. And I thought, this is amazing. This is where it's all going.
Well, that was the king of improvisation, is what they were doing.
Yeah. But, that eventually that kind of turned out to be the best of that movement.
Yeah.
I mean, he had the best guys and they made the best stuff. But I remember thinking, well, this is where jazz is going. And to a certain extent, that is where it was going. But it wasn't going to be my thing, but I was excited by it.
Well, then you had John McLaughlin with the Mahavishnu Orchestra doing even more.
Yeah, and Weather Report.
Weather Report, another great band.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Louis, let's talk about the number one on your list, Mr. Louis Armstrong. No one's ever come close to that guy.
Not even. Well, okay, so let's talk pops. First of all, in 1958, I saw him at the Hampton Beach Casino. My parents took me to see Louis Armstrong at the Hampton Beach Casino when I was 10. And I was playing trumpet at the time.
Yeah.
But I wasn't a jazz fan. And my parents were not musically literate. They were not hip. But of course, in 1958, Satchmo was, everybody knew who Satchmo was.
Yeah.
So my parents thought, well, it's Satchmo, this famous trumpet player. Let's take him to see this. Well, little did they know, I had heard other trumpet players, but then that was it. And at the time, I had no idea that I wanted to learn how to improvise. But later, when I began to go to school, to the Hot Fives and the Hot Sevens and the early band sounds from 1928 to the early 30s, and then the later big band sounds through the 30s into the early 40s, and then back to the small groups when he came up with the All-Stars starting right after the war, in 46, 47, that he stayed in that, kind of configuration for the rest of his life. When I studied the history and I listened to what he was doing, because I was trying to learn how to improvise. And one of the things that I noticed right away, when you're learning how to improvise, at least the way that we learn by ear, one of the things you do, and I did this when I was in Roomful, when they first gave me a solo, they would say, in the middle of this song, you take the solo. Well, I couldn't really trust myself to play something decent every night. I wasn't that accomplished yet as a soloist. So what you do is I listened to other players and I would hear what I liked and I would memorize somebody else's solo. And then when my time came, I would play it because then I knew where I was and I knew what to play. And when you're just starting out, that's a great thing to do, because as you memorize other players' things, you see how they thought. Why did they play this and then that? And so I'm trying to understand the chords are going on, and I'm listening to Sweets Edison or Buck Clayton And by the way, years later, I got to sit in with Sweets Edison, which was a great, great moment
Wow.
of my life.
Wow.
We got to play, we played together, and that was fabulous because I had been stealing from him, for years. And but he knew, as soon as he heard me play, he knew who I listened to. That's one thing you can tell if you've learned the whole history. You know who's influencing who. So anyway, I would learn a Sweets thing or a Buck Clayton thing or a little later on a Roy Eldridge thing. And I would always try to figure out, how did they think this up? And it was like, well, here are the chords. What are they doing? They're doing this, this, and this. Here's the chords. And they're trying to swing. So, it's when you play, it determines whether you're swinging or not. And gradually, I started to digest what these people were doing. Well, whenever I listen to Armstrong, there's no way that I could figure out what he was going to play, because eventually I realized all these other people were thinking, like, some people are thinking mostly harmonically about the changes, what are the notes that fit in the changes.
Right.
Some people are thinking more melodically, or some people are thinking more rhythmically, and they all have their kind of way of approaching things. But pretty much each of them focuses mostly on one aspect. With most jazz players, it's harmony. So they're playing notes that fit, whether they're playing a lot or a few, they've got to fit over the chords. So you've got to know the chords. Well, I'd be listening to some Hot Sevens recording, like that Lonnie Johnson's on, or particularly the late 20s stuff with the big band. And I'm going, you know what? He's doing something, he's improvising on the harmony, but he's also improvising rhythmically at the same time, and he's improvising melodically, all at the same time. Well, you can't do that unless you know how to do each of those things inside and out separately.
And he was a master at all three, right?
And nobody else has done that. No other trumpet player has done that. Very, very few jazz players of any kind have even done something like that. And the guy that's closest to it, in terms of what he's doing rhythmically as well as harmonically, he's not doing the same things, but he's improvising rhythmically, is Lester Young. And that's what made everybody perk up when they heard Prez, because they understood what Coleman Hawkins was doing, because it was based right on the chords. Rhythmically, it was pretty much the same, but he was coming up with all these great ideas, harmonically based. Prez was doing both, was actually doing all three. And he's the only other guy that did it. I mean, there's only a few other people that really did interesting things rhythmically. Charlie Christian did, Bill Evans later did. Yeah. But in order to think like Armstrong, you have to know what he knew. And I've never heard anybody that could come up with ideas and play them in the way that he. This is what I've been trying to do for the last 50 years. Not to copy him, but to do that thing my own way, to be playing rhythmically, melodically, and harmonically. Most jazz players don't play any melodically at all anymore. So I'm really focusing on trying to do those three things, but to integrate them. And if you try to do that, you come up with, like what Prez did. It doesn't sound like Armstrong, but he's doing the same things. So he comes up with his own way of doing it.
Right.
And that's what I try to do. It's like, at this point in my playing, you may like it or not like it, but nobody plays the way I play. So it would be very hard for somebody to guess what I'm going to do next at any point in my solos, because they're not trying to do the things that I'm trying to do. So that's how I think about trying to learn and trying to improve. And it all comes out of Pops.
That's a great way of explaining Pops at what he was all about. You just explained it perfectly.
Yeah, well, not nobody, but the vast majority of people aren't even aware of that. They're mostly aware of what he did with the All-Stars later in his life, when he really wasn't. He was still doing new things a lot of the time, but he wasn't doing things that were new on every level all the time, which that's what he was doing in the 20s and 30s. And, I have live recordings of him with big bands in the 30s, and it was different. I mean, he was playing different stuff all the time, that's the whole thing about jazz players, is that that not everybody understands, is that we all have a vocabulary of stuff that we can fall back on. Sometimes you play things that you played before because they work. So you're not improvising at those moments, but you're maybe playing something that you did improvise another time, and you're recreating it. And Armstrong did that later in his career quite a lot. If you study him from performance to performance and night to night, some nights he plays a lot of stuff that he's played before, phrases, things like that. Other nights, it's all fresh. It's like he was feeling good that night, and here comes all this new stuff. But in the 20s and 30s, that was the norm. And one other thing about that, and I've harped on this, you know who Ricky Riccardi is, right?
Yeah.
Well, Ricky is a pal. I've been to the archive in Queens. I've played one of Armstrong's trumpets.
Wow.
This is like, I wrote a poem about it. It's called "I Play One of Louis Armstrong's Trumpets." And if you're a professional player and you bring your own mouthpiece, they'll let you play one of his horns. So I played for about 20 minutes or a half an hour on one of his Selmers. And one of the great half hours of my life.
Yep.
Wow. As you can imagine. But anyway, the thing is, he did this. He had his horn section in his big band. If you listen to the stuff from the early 30s, they'll be playing a standard. I Can't Give You Anything But Love, or Stardust, stuff like that. And what he'll do is he'll have the horn section play chords. This is in a four beat feel. Swing is over a 4-beat feel, but the swing era came to be identified with emphasis on the 2 and the 4. 2, 3, 4. The 2 and the 4. You listen to his recordings. He has the sax sections playing chords on the 1 and the 3. So it's like he'll be, bah, 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 bah. It's inside out. The rhythm is inside out from what you would expect. And that's what allows him to play the phrases that he plays, to think the way he thinks. I made a half of the record was a jazz record about 20 years ago, and I tried to get the rhythm section to do that for me. And
they had a hard time. They had a hard time doing it.
They had a hard time. It didn't inspire me the way that I thought it might. But so he did that for quite a few years, and it's an intimate thing, that it's the accents when you're being given the music that you're responding to, that determines what you can think of to play. And of course, that hasn't been popular since 1932. So that's why nobody plays like him.
Right. So Al, where do you see yourself in the next few years with music at this point?
Well, I basically want to keep doing all the things that I'm doing, and producing records is pretty expensive, and I produced a lot of them at my own expense, and I've kind of reached the point where um, uh, I can't make one every year. So I can't afford to make one every year. I can make one, but the guy that pays the bills can't. Um, so uh, so I want to be. I still write 13 songs a year. I always used to write 13 songs a year and record them. It would always be new. You know, whatever record I made, those were the songs I wrote that year. And now, of course, I get in a backlog. I'm writing more than I'm recording. This year, I'm not going to make a record. Last year, I did. Hopefully, next year, I will again. And so I want to stay productive. I want to pick the stuff that I like the best out of what is now going to be more than I need. So that's a little bit different. I want to keep doing my plays as long as my actors are still alive and functional, because they get more. One of my best actors is 83. So every time we finish recording a play, they say, well, what are you going to write for us for next year? I said, Jesus, we're still in the studio, for Christ's sake. Give me a break. But it's exciting. This is not about music, but actors, most of them, they act parts that other people have played, that were written at other times for other people. My actors play a part that I wrote just for them. Nobody else is ever going to play that part. Nobody else before them ever created that part. They love that because they've never been treated. It's like they've been buying clothes off the rack their whole lives, and now they have a tailor.
There you go.
So I want to keep doing what I'm doing. Sure, it's the short answer. I don't want to branch out into anything more. 3 careers is enough.
By the way, thank you for doing that ID for my radio show.
That was fun. I did over 20 in the last week.
That's good.
Yeah. So, and they're fun to do. They're easy to do. I got my little recording set up here at home, and you can kind of see around me, and the mic's behind me.
Yep.
My keyboard's right in front of me. And so, no, you're very welcome. And anytime if you want to freshen it up a year from now or some other time.
Yeah, I'll ask you down the road. And
sure.
How do people find out about you? You have a website?
I've got a website, but the best place really to get to know me is at my YouTube channel. So my YouTube channel is just Al Basile 9. It's just ALBASILE 9. If you go to YouTube and you put in that, and I say that because when you go there, all of my records are there, except one. So there's 250 songs. You can listen to any of them. My plays are all there. So there's 7 plays. There are all kinds of live clips of me reading my poetry there. My poetry show, where I have my conversation with my two peers, that once a month. I've been doing that. I'm in year 4. There are about 50 of those shows, and at those shows we each read our work and we talk about it back and forth. So you kind of get to hear why you wrote something or what other people like about it, and it's not just shop talk. It's interesting. You get to see that poets are not some kind of weirdos, but they're when they talk together, they're just friends talking together, which is, I think, good for some people to see. All of that is at my YouTube channel.
Great.
So, you can, there's a playlist just for the plays, and all the albums are, have playlists and are can be accessed individually. It's all there except for the one jazz record I made 20 years ago, because that didn't get, it wasn't publicized because my publicist is a blues guy, and the audience this wouldn't have been a record for that audience.
Right.
And I don't have a publicist for the jazz audience. What I discovered years ago, even though I do both, up until a few years ago when my band got old and got diabetes and dropped out, I was always working locally here in Rhode Island and around New England a little bit. Well, now I can't remember why I was telling this, but well, it's gone. So
right.
We'll let it go. Next question.
Well, the next question, it's going to be, I'm going to say thank you, and we're going to get going here because we've been on for quite a while now.
Hey, we have. Well, it didn't seem that long.
No, it's been fun.
Yeah.
You've answered all my questions, which is good. How are the questions?
Excellent questions. I appreciate them.
And,
I really do.
And when you get a chance, my YouTube channel is WUML /
WUML
/ Blues Deluxe, one word, BLUESDELUXE.
Gotcha.
You can find the videos there. Yours will be up after this weekend.
Super. Oh, I'm interested to see who you got. How many interviews do you have?
There's a lot. I mean, Joe Uwaley, the one I told you about before the interview, the drummer from Mayall is there. Kim Simmons from Savoy Brown was an interesting one.
Wow. Okay. Wow, Savoy Brown. I haven't heard that name in a while.
You name it. I've done a whole bunch of different people all over from different genres of music too, not just blues. Different people.
Right. Super.
There's a bunch. I mean, you'll be surprised at some of the people that you see in there. I've done Tinsley Ellis a couple times.
Okay.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of people from. I mean, Walter Trout is in there.
Yep. Great.
And you know how I got the interview with Joe Uwaley was from two guys from Texas, Jim Suler and Buddy Whittington, who was a guitarist in Mayall's band.
Okay.
Buddy connected me with Joe. And then Joe got a hold of me and he said, "Yeah, let's do an interview." And lo and behold, where do you think he started out? Same as you did, Haverhill, Mass.
It's amazing. Well, we used to joke in Roomful because, of course, all of those guys, with the exception of Doug James, who's from California, all the rest of them are Rhode Islanders. So I'm from Massachusetts, so it's still the Northeast. Yep. And so we used to talk about the Rhode Island blues mafia because there were so many, people involved in blues from a part of the country you wouldn't expect.
Yep.
But yeah, Haverhill is another part of the country you wouldn't expect.
Nope.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. And, Providence has going back to the swing era, has a lot of, in the jazz world and the blues world, a disproportionately large number of great musicians.
Oh,
they came out of Providence. So, you had Bobby Hackett, Dave McKenna, Scott Hamilton, Harry Allen, Paul Gonsalves. It goes on and on.
Right.
For a small place. But it was always the tradition. I mean, we would go see there were always older guys,
Yep.
local guys that played. You know, when I first saw Duke, he was with a band that was led by Kenny Lyon. You ever hear Kenny Lyon?
Yep.
Well, so he had a band that had John Nicholas was in the band. Of course, moved to Texas, and nobody knows he's from Rhode Island. Steve Nardella, who went to Chicago, played harp in Chicago for every decade since. And then, of course, Duke and Kenny stayed locally. But that was an example of an older band that we would go see. Scott and I would go to see those guys because they were a little older than we were.
Yep.
When you're starting out, that's what you do. There were always people to go see. Yep. So that's, you know, I mean, we used to think, well, every place must be like this, but
no,
isn't like that.
New England is lots of great musicians in this area.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was fortunate.
Well, Al, I need to say thank you very much. I don't want to take any more of your time, but
no, that's okay, John. This was an hour very well spent. So
I appreciate it, and thanks for all the insight into your career and the things that you're doing and still doing today.
Yeah. Well, don't get me started. I got a million stories, and you only heard about a half a dozen.
Well, we'll have to do it again sometime.
Any time. I enjoyed talking to you.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Great.
Take care.
You too.
All right. See ya.